Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau in Auckland, New Zealand.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
How's it going, Zach? It's been a little while. You've been away in Japan.
Indeed. My youngest son, just finished his 5th grade, and he went to a Japanese immersion public school in Seattle. And the Japanese immersion kids get to do a 5th grade trip. So we were there. He was doing a homestay for a few days, and my wife and Kai, his older brother, and Aki were all traveling in Japan. Our oldest was busy doing other stuff, so she wasn't able to make it. Anyway, it was great. It was really fun.
And how would you rate the buildings in Japan? Because you're saying it was quite hot and humid there.
It was hot and humid. There was a lot of air conditioning going on inside buildings, and so they were very, very comfortable. Japan is just an amazing place, and it has this. It just has an incredible kind of design tradition, right? And then also all of these historical buildings. The typical building that you see in the city is not necessarily a beautiful building. Like, there are plenty of buildings that are kind of on the ugly side. But the way that they are put together and the urban design of the cities in Japan just makes everything feel so human scale and gracious and wonderful to be in. So, like you're in the middle of one of the most populous cities in the world, maybe the most populous city in the world, Tokyo, and you get off the train station, walk a couple blocks, and it feels like you're in a neighborhood, and it's just great. I love Japan.
Awesome. All right. Well, back to our interview for today. We're going back to Australia and back to a previous guest of the show, Alex Slater, who we've had on back in episode 76, and he presented at this year's Thrive conference in Australia. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and it's probably quite a good introduction into a series that we've got coming up here on the Passive House podcast, all about keeping cool. And before we do that, we've got a new feature. Actually, before we get into that, we should thank our sponsors. We're a bit out of practice, Zach. We should thank our sponsors before we get underway.
Absolutely. So a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thank you, too, to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Glavel, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwool North America, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. And thanks, too, to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, and Source 2050.
All right, so we are going to be talking a little bit coming up about keeping cool. It's something that's come up quite a lot, and I think will continue to come up. Certainly, a lot of people I talk about in Australia and here in New Zealand, it is becoming an increasing issue. And in fact, I know it's been pretty warm in your part of the world. Zach, I've heard multiple stories, Death Valley getting some records this year. I heard just in the last 24 hours something about Phoenix, I think it was Arizona, where there have been multiple reports of injuries of just people walking around in near 50 degrees Celsius heat outside, because there's a bit of a heat island effect in that very built up city with not very many trees. So it's becoming a big problem, but we have some solutions. But we also want to know what other solutions are out there. And we've got a new feature on the show, and we'd like to get some input from listeners. So, Zach, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's right. So we have this new voice message tool. It's called SpeakPipe, and we have a link in the show notes that you can click on and visit the page. And you just press the start recording button and share your message with us. And so basically what we're looking for is, what's your DIY cooling and summer resilience solution? This will be part of the series on cooling and summer resilience that Matthew just spoke about, and we'd love to hear from you to help tell this story. So how are you keeping cool and wildfire smoke free this summer? Do you have any fun solutions? Have you DIY'd or MacGyvered a ceiling fan or a makeshift icebox? We want to know. So visit this page in the show notes and record your message. Keep it short and sweet. Let us know your name and where you're calling in from, and you may be featured in an upcoming episode.
Awesome. Looking forward to hearing that. And I'm looking forward to hearing solutions for new builds and what designers and architects are up to, but also what people are doing to adapt an existing space to try and make it more comfortable during warmer weather as well. All right. Alex Slater, as I mentioned here, was on episode 76 of the Passive House podcast, so you can go back and check out a bit of the history of his practice. But in this episode, I caught up with him after the Thrive conference in Australia this year, where he presented on some tools that he was playing around with. Now, Shared Space, it's an architecture firm, but it's a bit of a special little practice. Their aim is to help fill the gaps between professional architects and what they do in the passive house space. And they really do that by encouraging and following the practices through awareness of what clients want, but also environmental factors. So really interesting conversation, and we'll jump into it and we'll have a bit of a catch up afterwards. So here's my conversation with Alex Slater of Shared Spaces. Well, thanks, Alex, for joining us back on the Passive House Accelerator. You were with us many episodes ago, back in the 70s, I think, in the 76 or something like that, a couple of years ago. I missed seeing you in Melbourne recently, but tell us a bit about. We'll come on to the conference, but tell us a bit about what you've been up to recently. What's keeping you busy these days?
Yeah, I was born after 76, so probably makes sense. What I've been up to these days, I've been diving into the PHPP big time, seeing what's available, and trying to just get to a point where we can have a clear understanding of what this tool can actually show us, and how we can show people who need to know, so compliance officers, building surveyors here, building certifiers in some states and territories of Australia, what they need to know to say that this is a compliant tool. And that's really what I spoke about at Thrive 24, which is just amazing. There was a huge, excellent lineup of presentations, and came away from that conference really excited, really open-minded about what the possibilities are of where we can take things, and just feeling welcome, just feeling really welcome that actually there is a place for this, and there's a place to be able to educate people and a place to be able to see what can be done.
Can you remind people about shared space architecture? What is it, and what do you mostly do?
Our work is random. So anything from commercial energy ratings down to boutique homes. And that includes designing passive house homes, but also people who just want to understand the health and home. So I work with efficiency as my kind of bent, and that's a cost-driven reason. Because the more efficient you make something, not in terms of energy costs, but the more efficient you make something, the lower you can make build costs just from the way it is, and still appreciate delight. So not every cake has a cherry on top. Like not every room needs a full glazed facade, stuff like that. So that's what we end up doing.
Yeah. And you're based in Victoria. Are you in Melbourne or are you out of Melbourne?
No, I'm in Canberra at the moment. So
in Canberra.
Still got contacts up in Canberra, which is lovely. And it's a beautiful city to be in this time of year.
Oh, okay. But you're registered...
in Melbourne. Yeah, I'm registered in Victoria, yeah.
You're registered in Victoria as as an architect?
That's right. Yep.
Right. And you also do, so as part of energy, anyone in your field is likely to do Nat HERS, but you do quite a lot of HERS ratings?
I do a bit. I do mainly for my own jobs, and those passive house jobs that come through and say they need a Nat HERS report. Got a couple of apartment blocks on the books at the moment, which is interesting. And just to see the different rules and the different performance with different materials, and the way that we input things, and to actually really understand how closely aligned these tools are once the input's right, or once you know how the engine behind the tools work. And I think that's the take home. And there's been a lot of talk about that in Australia, particularly at the moment. So it's good to see.
Did you say that you have to do a Nat HERS certificate for passive houses?
I say you don't.
Yeah. Well, what's that all about? Because so Nat HERS, that we've talked about that. It's the National Home Energy Rating Scheme. From what I understand, the passive house specification is higher than Nat HERS, but what, you still have to go through that system for certification?
No, and it's not necessarily higher.
Okay.
Depends on the materiality and depends on the input. For example, a Nat HERS rating would estimate an air tightness level or air change level of between 8 and 12, but we're talking permeability in the code. So I've built a tool that automatically gives me permeability when I measure 0.6 and stuff like this. And so the development of this Excel sheet, which I spoke of at the conference, it was purely so I know that the information I'm giving is accurate, because I had a real struggle to change all my inputs in the Word document. Like it would take forever when I've done a PHPP model and had to make sure that the right project has the right data in it, and I haven't left historic data in the document. So it's really for my own weakness that it was built to say, okay, this works. But from that, you can pull information out and build tools to work with compliance of different countries.
Okay.
Automatically. So that's what I was looking at. Yes.
Right. So let's give a overview, because I wasn't there, our audience wasn't there. What did you present at Thrive?
I presented a PHPP for compliance. So PHPP is a compliance tool, which went through the different pathways that we have for compliance here in Australia. So I mentioned 6. It's not only Nat HERS. Like we've got things that are DTS, or like elemental provisions. We've got other tools around that give us like a reference building model. So you can use Energy Plus and build 2 models. You can use PHPP and build 2 models.
Right.
There's another thing that's come out recently in 2022 called Specification 44. Now, this is the kind of game changer, because it looks at heating load, cooling load, and total load, the climate zones. Then you've got to calculate like degree hours of heating and degree hours of cooling, hours of humidity. So I pulled out EPW files and like weather files, and made those calculations based on hourly data. Because the key here is that it's on hourly data. I understand the PHPP has correction factors because it's monthly, and those correction factors are used to say that this is pretty close to hourly data. But when you're dealing with air tightness, which is another thing I mentioned on the presentation, is monthly data should be adequate because we're not relying on the external environment to heat and cool the home.
Yep.
We're relying on what we're exchanging with the external environment to maintain a temperature in the home. Therefore, the variation over an hour is not going to make a huge deal of difference.
Yeah, right. So when you talk about compliance, you're talking about compliance with the regulations across Australia, not compliance with Passive House.
That's right. Yeah.
And those different methods of compliance, how does that work? Do designers have a choice of which pathway they go down, or is it different systems for different locations?
Oh, these can be used across Australia. There is a difference with heating and cooling load requirements. So some states do not require you to conform with both heating and cooling loads. They just want you to conform with the total load over the year.
Yeah. Well, is that new?
Yeah,
I mean, how long has there been any compliance requirements for cooling load?
No, that's been ingrained, I think, at least in Victoria for some time.
Okay.
I don't know the year. But that's usually where we fail, and I agree we fail.
Right.
If we want to keep our, particularly in an airtight home, like if we get too much heat, it's harder for that heat to dissipate.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
And particularly when we've got a hot summer or something, or a hot week, which these climate zones sometimes have, it's hard to just purge the house.
Sure.
When it's airtight. So I think that's a good thing. And it's actually informed me better as a passive house designer to see, okay, I can instantly see the results of a specification 44, instantly see the results of what a NatHERS equivalent energy would be, like what's that equal in the star rating.
Yeah.
If we use passive house as a compliant tool and we say that the megajoules is what it is and it can be accurate.
Right.
What does that equal in a star rating? We're getting like star ratings in 8, 9, 10, you know, can't go beyond 10. But so we're getting really high star ratings because we're reducing our energy load based on a modeling tool.
Because under PHI, which is what you've got in Australia, 10% of the time allowable above 25 degrees Celsius, that's quite a long time. Particularly if a lot of those hours are during the day.
How many hours in a year, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, we
1440 or something.
Well, we did this calculation here for Auckland fairly recently, and assumed that if you assume that most of those hours occur during daylight, then it's actually quite a large number of days, because you're basically doubling the time if you take away all the nighttime hours. I mean, I know there are parts of Australia where it stays above 25 degrees overnight, but it's not just simply saying, oh, it's 10% of the number of days. It turns out to be more than that.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's hours, and it's the purging time, and it's the uncomfort even at like 24.9 or 24.8 or whatever you want to say. But one thing I do to make sure that we do meet things, or two things actually, is align the tools. Like what I've seen in history, and the 10 years I've been doing this stuff, this passive house, which is awesome and love it. But the 10 years I've been doing this, is there's a notion that we have to build lightweight to meet passive house. Absolutely not. Passive house doesn't tell you that. It just says you've got to meet an energy demand. So you add in your thermal mass where you can. You add in your shading, and that helps to cool the home, because that is why that is how we can do it, and that's why we need thermal mass to bring those temperatures down to a point that are comfortable. Because it's very hard to purge an air like a lightweight airtight home.
Right. So do you find that thermal mass consistently performs better in warmer climates?
The homes I've been modelling, yes, and so I'm predominantly in Victoria, and I don't think I'd say warmer. I think I'd say those with a greater temperature range.
Right. Okay.
It kind of adds a solidity to it.
Right.
That you can't get any other way, because it's connected with the earth. Like, it's connected in the way it should perform. Like why did our ancient cultures live in caves? Because they were thermally comfortable. Why do ancient cultures live at the bottom of the forest? Because it's thermally comfortable. So we need nature to do this. You know, we can't just assume that a tent in an open field, an airtight tent, mind you, is going to help. It may. An airtight tent's better than just a tent that's not airtight. But the connection to earth, the connection to nature is so important because that helps you with your climate data.
Yep.
What does the landscape look like? You know, these things.
And what about shading? Are you able to, in those various compliance methods, do they account for shading in different ways, and how well do they do it?
Yeah. So, a Nathurst tool looks at shading as planes, similar to I think it's similar to the manual calculation in PHPP, where you draw your, or you delineate your side and your top, and you end up with a factor. So the shading factor happens in the Nathurst modeling tool that way. I think Energy Plus does points, similar to Design PH. And so you can use, I think we have to separate tools and standards. Like there are tools that do different things that are standard compliant.
Mm-hmm.
So you can use the tool of your choice because of the way it performs, or to meet a standard, or you can use a tool that's best for a particular project to meet the standard. And so I found that I like the percentage on Design PH, and I also like the way that you can see where the points are on windows in Design PH. So you actually get a visual understanding of what's going on. And that's something that's key. A lot of tools are kind of, the communication's lacking about how the tool is working. And the more that we know how a tool works, the better we can understand and communicate to our clients and the required authorities to say this is actually meeting what we need.
Yeah. Which I want to come back to education, which is what you started with, and you talked about communicating with across the board, including some of those the people who are doing the regulation and signing things off. The tricky thing with education, though, is unless people are paying to come on courses, it doesn't really pay the bills. But it's so necessary. But is that part of what you do? Do you try and get the message out, and how do you do that?
Yeah, so I'd imagine I do, and I have actually taken passive house designers and helped them with their sheets, helped them with their PHPP as like tutorials or tutorship, which I know that's how I learn very well. Like you sit me in front of an online course, I'm off with the fairies, a lot of the time. There is sometimes that I'm not because I'm really interested in it, but because the content's not specific to my brain, then it's not as absorbable as something that was, let's have a look at this project, like something that really 100% relates to what you're doing. Okay, you've addressed X, Y, and Z. How about A, B, and C? Let's look at A, B, and C today, and get it that way. So I think this is how education used to be delivered to people before we had institutions. I guess it was like a one-on-one. Let's do this together. Let's tutor each other. Do something. Let's work on it as a team, and you'll be better off. And I really like that with Passive House and the certification process. I also like that with Nathurst and the way that we can then have like a mentor assessor to help us through things. So there are ways to do it, but understanding what the tool does and understanding the effects, I think that's cool. And it's almost like you do join a course at the very start to get an overview, but you don't need to do a course again to pinpoint a problem. That's individual.
Yep.
And I think that's something I can offer, and something I've got quite a good rapport on in helping others achieve their sheets and making sure that's understandable.
Yeah. And what about beyond the people that have done the training and are doing, doing Passive House as designers, builders? do you work much with building surveyors, building consent officials, compliance people, and are you finding that they have heard about Passive House more? Or, what's the market uptake or the market awareness of Passive House?
Yeah, so I feel it's still a bit feared, and I think it's still feared. Most initial conversations I have, it goes straight to cost. It costs more.
Right. Yep.
And then, or there's some negativity around how it is for a different climate, a different situation, this, and this. So one thing I mentioned when I spoke at Thrive was approaching the situation in 3 tiers. And the first tier is about humility. So understanding that angst, that fear is coming from a place that has been educated to others and ourselves, and have a deep respect for what others bring, have a deep respect for the code that we have here and where it's come from. Years of study. Why would you just discount it? And then the next tier would be, then you know what you know, but approach that with curiosity to understand where you can push that, and keep saying yes when you know you can help, because you know you're onto something and you know it's good, right? So you've got to keep saying yes when you know you can help, and allow others to see what you can do, and then surround that with compassion, and that's where the communication comes in. So communicate clearly so that others understand more about what you bring, and then they can also be advocates for what you do, because you've approached it in a gentle, understandable, and clear way.
I think that's quite powerful. I am definitely guilty of not exercising humility when it comes to criticizing existing codes. I think that there's probably quite a lot of the Passive House community does that. It's a favourite pastime of ours is to dig holes and criticise codes. And I think that's justified to a degree, because some of them, there are parts which are, I know of our building code, which are very inadequate. But I think what you're saying is that we should still respect the process and respect what that there is some good in there. We just want to push people a little bit further.
I mean, why not? Why do we poke holes into things when we're dealing with airtight membranes? Have an additive approach. You can improve this, approach. Let's see how far we can go. Love what you're doing, but I know a trick. You can solve it this way. I love that part about it. Oh, yeah, I understand where that came from. Oh, that junction in the corner is going to be very difficult because you're going to lose a lot of heat there. Why don't we pack it with something, or why don't we change the detail a little bit to make it different so that we have a better building? Yeah. Even better than what the code says. That's just amazing. Let's just do it that way, And that positivity can then flow on to all the people working on that building, and to others that are dealing with this energy industry. Like we have an issue. We know we have an issue. So why make it worse? That's kind of where it comes from.
It sounds like it was a great conference. I did catch up with Andy and Talina and a few others immediately after, which and we were fortunate to catch up with some attendees straight after day 2. What was sort of your overarching takeaway, particularly in the context? I mean, you've been to a few Passive House conferences over the years. What was your takeaway and what's your feeling about Passive House in Australia in 2024?
Good question. I feel we're still, to be blunt, putting ourselves on a pedestal, but I understand why.
Right.
But I understand why, because it's excellent. And also I feel that we have a great network that we can utilize. And that's come through again and again and again about the excitement and the positivity and the support that's provided by this amazing community that just sees love in things, is expressing positive ways to do stuff. But being positive doesn't mean you have to put yourself on a pedestal, and that's where the humility comes in and say, okay, well, we know what we can do. We know it's amazing. Let's just bring people with us. Let's teach, let's understand, let's keep going. And even if we do 10% more, not a passive house, like let's just give a tip to someone, to a builder, to a homeowner, to whatever. Say, I learned this somewhere. Now, if you take account of X, Y, and Z, you're going to have a better performance by 10% or whatever. So I think the takeout from the community is the community's there. We need to be seen in a better light. Not that we're not seen in a good light, but a better light.
Do you want to give a quick plug? Let people know where they can find you.
Oh yeah, somewhere along the east coast of Australia. So Building Physics Australia is a site I've put. It's a business name for shared space. That's where a lot of passive house work happens, as well as just conversations, tutoring. If people want that, happy to talk. Not a problem.
Nice.
And I think that's it. Building Physics Australia. Instagram's there, website's there.
Great.
Phone number might be there. I can't remember. So, yeah.
Awesome. Hey, well, thank you very much, Alex, for sharing some of your insights from Thrive. I saw some posts on LinkedIn. People should check that out and might sort of whet their appetite a little bit, and you can go and find out more. Keep up the good work, and I look forward to hearing more. I'm really positive what I've heard from what's been going on in Australia, and the way that passive houses are looking and fitting into the different climate zones in that space. So, I think I'm excited to see where that goes in the future, in the coming years. And hopefully, we just sort of see that uptake. And I agree, there's a opportunity for humility there as well to help spread that knowledge.
Yeah, and just run with it. Go with the flow,
Yep.
If you build a dam, you're not going to get anywhere. But go with the flow, see what happens.
Nice.
Something will come around the corner. We're all good. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks for your time and what you do with this as well. So,
pleasure. Thanks.
I appreciate the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
And that was Alex Slater. He's a registered architect in Australia and also an accredited NatHERS assessor. And his practice is shared space architecture. What do you think, Zach?
Well, it was great to have Alex back on, and I really enjoyed hearing his 3 tiers: the humility, curiosity, and compassion. Kind of the advice to all of us, and I'm sure himself as well, but all of us in this community. It's good to have a little reminder. I mean, I think that I think we feel a sense of urgency to tackle the climate crisis, and we also feel like we've got this great tool, science-based tool in Passive House to make a big dent in it, and that that it makes really kind of transformative change in buildings. So I think it's possible that we get carried away sometimes in our communication.
Yeah. And I think Alex had a really good way of putting that we have a reason to want to be on a pedestal because what we do is great. Right. But it's like you said, it is a good reminder about that humility and understanding that other people are in a different place. And I've often reflected back to a time before I knew about homestay, passive house, and any sort of higher level of performance. And really, the first time I heard about it, and I didn't immediately think that air tightness was a good idea when I first heard about it, and it took quite a long time to get into a position of being not just interested, but then progressing towards passionate about it. And it's really useful to be reminded of where other people are starting out on that in that process and of understanding. And even today, there was still a lot of unanswered questions about how we do this well for different climates. And that's something that I think is really exciting that's going on in Australia, and I know other parts of the world as well, but how they're figuring out what works in summer as well as in winter to achieve those performance targets of Passive House, and also really thinking about that 10% threshold for Passive House Institute target. That is quite a long amount of time that you're allowed to exceed 25 degrees Celsius. I don't have my converter here, Zach. You might have to do that conversion.
Well, yeah, I mean, just off the cuff.
So our limit is 25 degrees Celsius, and you're allowed to exceed that for 10% of the time. If that does occur during daytime hours, that's quite a large number of days potentially where you are allowed to exceed that. And a lot of people say it's too much. So a lot of experienced passive house designers will be targeting more like 5% or even 3% or lower.
Mm-hmm.
And also, as Alex was pointing out, even 24 degrees, 22 degrees for extended periods is a bit too warm. So, really looking at that and concepts around thermal mass, how that works with air tightness, where it works, where it doesn't work so well. I guess that's the thing that I really enjoyed about Alex is just that willingness to be open to those possibilities.
Yeah. 25C is 77 Fahrenheit. I mean, and I think that kind of exploration or openness comes back to the humility and curiosity piece, and which are two elements that I think that we need to hold really, really dearly and with clarity as we move forward, because everything, like, there's so much change. There's climates are changing, but also the carbon intensity of our electricity is changing. The embodied carbon or upfront carbon in our materials is changing. The global warming potential of our refrigerants is changing. And the role of buildings in grids, and it's all of these things are moving.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to I guess the humility piece is recognize that what is true today will be different in a few years.
Yep.
In terms of like the kind of optimized solution, and to remain curious about that, how all these things are moving.
I also really like Alex's focus on education and educating consumers, but also educating other peers in the industry. And also, I get to see, and he also does a lot of work educating people who are involved in compliance. So they have this thing called NatHERS, which we've talked about in the past. It's the National Home Energy Rating Scheme. It's a compulsory requirement now for new homes across Australia. So you've got to have an energy rating. And it might seem crazy that even a passive house still has to go through this NatHERS process. I think Alex, again, I was expecting him to say, yeah, that's ridiculous. He's completely humble about that and says, well, no, that they are different, and he is helping people to navigate through some of those differences and really understand how the different systems work, what is good about each one, and also then have conversations with compliance people and say, hey, look, there's this thing called PHPP. If someone's trained how to use that, then that's what that means in relation to NatHERS. And we need more of that education for people to understand these tools and how they can work together, rather than just sort of fighting against each other and shooting things down and saying, oh, that one's stupid because it's not what we do. So I think that's a really helpful approach in general.
Well, and that kind of that compliance challenge, or that basically, hey, I've already modeled a passive house with PHPP, and now you're asking me to do this other kind of jump through these other hoops to prove that I'm compliant with this other, with this program. Isn't it obvious a passive house is going to do it? That dynamic is all over the place. I think it's pretty universal around the globe.
Right.
And so, for instance, we just worked with Ed May to help create a tool called the Carbon Check Tool for the New York State, funded by NYSERDA, that takes a PHPP model or a WUFI passive model, so both the PHI approach and the FIAS approach, and through his software wizardry, allows you to then do a comparison to what the building would be built as at base code for New York, so that and then compare it to what it is as a passive house, so that you can demonstrate compliance with different programs that require a certain percentage better than code. So that's just one example, and there's all these really interesting questions around software and workflow, and it's an important piece of our kind of collective practice and improvement, because we need to figure out how to avoid duplicating effort and automating things. So, like if you make one change in your PHPP, oh no, what does that do to the compliance tool now that I how do you automate that process? So it kind of opens up this entire kind of software development and information management part of our effort. It's like that's like a discipline in its own right.
We weren't planning on talking about that, but Ed May is such a great guy, and that did come up. I noticed that in my LinkedIn thread this week, posted by Darren O'Day from Australia. It must have been very early for Darren to get up to watch that session from Ed this last week. Is any of that information still available, or is that accessible anywhere?
I think that Ed presented at Passive House Network.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. I think so. I'll take a look and share a link to that in show notes. Yeah.
But some very, very cool stuff that actually both of those guys, Ed and also Darren O'Day, is worth checking out as well. He's doing some really cool stuff with the ability for different systems to share data and not have to re-input stuff is pretty exciting, the stuff that he's working on there. All right. Now, we mentioned at the top of the show, we want to hear stories about what you're doing to keep cool. So remember, we have got a new feature, like a voicemail feature using SpeakPipe. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes. We'd love to hear your stories. You can record those. Just click on the link and make it short and sweet, and let us know what you're doing to keep cool, whether you're incorporating something into the design of a new project or trying to work with an existing building that might be struggling a little bit in the heat at the moment. What are you doing to keep it cool? What's working? We'd love to find out. It doesn't have to necessarily be a best-in-class passive house solution. I know that Zach, you're probably starting to sweat now because you turned your fan off for the sake of this recording.
In the office, yes, I'm dreaming of the power button right now.
People don't appreciate. They can't hear the suffering that you're going through.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you've got
everyone.
Yeah, if you've got a similar story about what's getting you through the summer, then check that out. We'd love to get your voice on the podcast as well. Leave a short message there, and we might use it on a future episode. All right. Anything else we've got coming up, Zach?
No, we're stay tuned for the cooling and resilience series.
Yeah,
that'll be coming out next week, and we will be back with live programming in September, the beginning of September.
Awesome. All right. Hey, thanks for listening in. Thank you, Zach. Great to catch up again. And looking forward to this upcoming series all about cooling and keeping cool with good design. So that will kick off next week here on Passive House Podcast.